preached for us last night.
Oh, yeah.
Great message. And you preached on adoption, and the privilege of adoption is in prayer. And the 2 points that stood out at the end that you really talked about was prayer of pain, which we all pray, which I would submit that sinners do as well too by nature. When we're in pain, we cry out to God. But then you talked about the prayer of purpose, and a tremendous message. And here we are on a Thursday, the two of us, people in and out. We're getting ready for Sunday and all the preparation that goes into it. But I wanted us to just sort of have a conversation, and I wanted to start with this book that you've written. This is your newest book that you've written, the latest one, but it's the oldest one.
That's right.
The manuscript. And it's called Finding God's Purpose in Life's Problems. Last night after the service, I was here late counseling and then went home and had my decaf, my sugar-free popsicle. And I started reading through this, which honestly, if you sat down, you could read this in one night. Absolutely. It's a great read. But I think actually it's something that you could almost slow down and slow read and break it down as a devotional, pray over it, think through it. You said on the back, Finding God's Purpose in Life's Problems is a transformative and inspirational book that navigates here's what caught my attention, the complex terrain of life's challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Complex terrain of life's challenges. I was saying to you just a minute ago when we were setting up, when I was younger, I felt like at the time everything was black and white. And I still believe that there are eternal truths that are black and white. The man, I would roar, it's heaven or hell, turn or burn, up or down, black or white, in or out. You're either right with God or you're headed away from God. And I think that that's true. I don't want to throw all of that away. But the older I've gotten, the more trials that I've gone through, the more I've found that life's terrain is complex.
Sure.
And really, the reality is, a great friend of mine one time said, the truth is simple. The truth is simple. How to live the truth is not always so simple. How to express that. And so this book really, I think, comes out of human experience, looking for divine guidance. That's kind of what I came away from when I closed the book and read the last section. I'm like, wow, that's very powerful. Finding God's purpose in life's problems. Tell us, what was the problem that this was born out of? How did this book come into being? And what was it that entered into your life that said, hey, you might not have the world by the tail?
Sure. Well, I grew up exactly like what you described. I was the same type of fire-breathing preacher that was encouraging right or left. You pick your path, and it's as simple as that. And it's took me pastoring to teach me a lot about people and to realize that there are real complexities in dealing with them. So I entered the pastorate at the age of 24. It was 2012 when I began to pastor, and spent 3 years in the pastorate. And church was going well. It was growing. When I had taken the church, we started with 7 people and had grown it to a high day of almost 100. Consistently ran right at 70. And so it seemed like the Lord was blessing. People were also growing spiritually. But me pastoring came to an abrupt halt because one Friday afternoon I went to work and my wife called me and she said, I just want to let you know I'm leaving. And I was not even taken aback by it because I didn't understand.
Right.
I asked her where she was going. I said, well, where are you heading to? Like, totally blind spot.
Something that you had seen, red flag.
No.
This was something that, like, you guys have been in deep, counseling or marital problems. You pick up the phone on Friday and your world's upside down.
Absolutely. And she seemed to be doing everything she was supposed to be doing. She was a pastor's wife, very involved with the church. Mm-hmm. And just one day, all of a sudden, it was over. And I remember immediately when she told me that she was leaving and who she's leaving with and all the things, I'm just plunged into despair. And I'm frantically, I worked at a radio station at the time, and I'm just trying to put something on so I can get out of there. And when I leave, I don't even know where to go. I'm just driving the roads, you know, trying to figure out what to do, what's happening, where do I go? And that's where it started, and it lasted like that for several months. Of course, you know, I tried to talk to her and reason with her, but she wasn't interested. And after about 3 months, she did ask. She called and she said, "Can I come back?" And I said, "Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, I want you to, and I want to try and work through this." And she came back, and honestly, she was only there for about 3 weeks, but those 3 weeks were harder than all of it combined and more difficult.
Wow.
Just because of the grotesque sin that she had been involved in. Things that my mind, having been raised in church, had never even had to comprehend. And so that's when, as the back cover talks about the difficult terrain, the complex terrain, I mean, my moral compass was spinning out of control. Because I'm trying to justify and reason through this, that, you know, maybe she's not that bad and what she's done's not that wrong. And then one night we were having revival at our church. You remember Brother Sammy Allen?
Yes.
He was preaching revival for us. And he went back and he spoke to her during the service very privately. And after the service, I could tell something was not right. And I asked her, I said, "What did the preacher say to you?" And she said, "Well, he told me not to leave again." And I said, "Oh, well, I wonder why he would say that." And she said, "Well, I don't know how he knew, but I was planning on leaving again tonight." And that night I told her, we talked on the way home, and I said, "You've done this once before. Obviously, can't stop it if this is what you decide to do. But for the sake of the children and myself, if you want to go this route, then this is the end." And so tonight's your choice. If you want to leave, you can leave, but that's where we have to stop it. And we get home. She made the decision that night. She woke me up about midnight. Before that, I asked if she had some sleeping pills, and I said, "I'm just going to take some sleeping pills and lay down and go to sleep, and you can do what you're going to do." She woke me up, and she sat down, and she said, "Is it okay if I leave?"
Wow.
I said, "Well, I don't want you to, but if that's what you want, I know I can't stop you."
Right.
And she leaned over. She said, "Would you like to kiss me on the cheek one more time before I go?" And so I did, and she walked out. And that was the end. That was 2015 when that happened. So this book here, I wrote this in 2016, but it was, for me, a very cathartic process. I was spilling my emotions and lessons I'm learning out on paper. And that book, I let a few people read it because I thought, well, maybe I can put this out and help some folks. And honestly, it needed to sit on my computer for several years.
It needed some marinade.
Yeah, that's right. I needed about 8 years of it just sitting there. And when I was putting some other works together, I ran across that, went through it, edited it, culled a lot out, you know, the more personal pieces of it that were just probably too much. But I wanted to convey the lessons that I learned, because these aren't lessons you can be taught in a seminary. So you have to experience.
Yeah, so that leads me, I guess, so people are watching this, whether they're in ministry or whether they're sitting in the pew, or maybe they haven't been in church in a long time, there are some lessons that you just don't learn sitting in the pew or filling in the blank in Sunday school. There are some lessons that are only learned in the actual trial itself. Let me back up and press just a little bit. How do you process? And if I'm throwing something at you, then just say, "No, I never even crossed my mind." But how do you process? It's one thing if you have been out of the will of God and you're just rebellious and you're living like hell, and this comes to your doorstep. How did you process your relationship with God when you, in all essence, could say, man, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, and this happens. Was there a season of bitterness towards God himself? Not just about the situation, but I mean, I'm not trying to throw something on you wasn't there, but was there a season where you're like, hey, this isn't right, this isn't fair, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and why are you letting this happen to me?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the knee-jerk reaction. I think most people I've talked to that have experienced things on a similar plane, they're trying to serve God. Since it happened to me, I regularly get calls from pastors who deal with similar issues. And that is a common complaint. I'm serving God, I'm pastoring, I'm trying to do right. How could this happen to me? For me, processing it, I didn't have a lot of people I could talk to that had been in a similar place.
Sure.
And so for me, my initial instinct was, this isn't fair, it's not right, and I'm done. I'm done with ministry, I'm getting out.
So you got to that point where you were ready to walk away?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was on the way out. I specifically one night, and this was the night that the Lord really got a hold of me.
Mm-hmm.
I was making plans to go out of town, and I was just going to get into whatever trouble came along. And I'm riding home from work that night, thinking about my plans. That's a Thursday, thinking about my plans for Friday night, what I'm going to do. On the way home, a young man crosses the yellow lines, hits me almost head on. Just a few feet over, we would have been in a head-on collision. If I would have went a few feet the other way, I would have went off a steep embankment. The highway patrol officer told me either way, I probably would have been killed. He sideswipes me, spins the whole vehicle around, shatters the glass. And my first thought, though, I'm sitting there covering in glass, looking out of my smoking vehicle, looking at this other vehicle. And my first thought was, why didn't I just die? And then I'm angry because I felt like God allowed this to happen, and now he's deprived me of getting me out of the pain.
Bro, that's literally a Book of Job moment. You can't get any more Job than that. I just curse God and die. Yeah.
And that was the bitterness I was feeling.
Wow.
And that next night, I decided I'm still going through my plans, and God can kill me if he wants to. And honestly, in my heart, I almost craved that.
Yeah.
Because of the pain. And so I start looking for rental vehicles.
Yeah.
Can't find anything. I call my mom. She didn't know what my plans were, but I said, hey, I just need help finding a rental. Could you help? So she's calling around trying to help me out. And we think we found one. And I said, great, tell them to hold it. I'm on my way. I go there to pick up the vehicle. I walk in, tell them what I'm there for. And it's like a Seinfeld moment. Have you seen that clip of Seinfeld?
You know how to take the reservation.
Yeah.
You just don't know how to keep the reservation.
That's exactly what happened. I walk in, I ask for the vehicle. They say, well, we don't actually have any here because there was a hurricane that happened in Florida. Now, I'm not saying that whole hurricane happened for my benefit.
Okay.
But nonetheless, the result of it is I didn't have a car. I find another car where I bought my car from that I had wrecked, and I'm going to the dealership, and I'm saying, hey, I'm on the way. If you got a car for me. They told me, my mom found that one. They said, yeah, we got a car. I said, well, I'm coming to get it. And they said, oh, don't come tonight because we're closing soon. You don't have enough time to get here. And so, no car then. I got the car the next day because I needed it anyway, but all my plans were ruined. And I drove over to see some friends in Tennessee, and in a parking lot after that whole weekend, I just sat in the parking lot and I said, you know what, Lord, I'm not running from you anymore. If you want me to preach, if you want me to continue in ministry, that's your business. But I'm content sitting on a pew, just trying to be a faithful Christian. And if that's all you want out of me, I'm fine with that. Because of my background and region, I just figured I wasn't going to preach again.
Yeah.
And it wasn't long after that I got the first call from a man. He was going to Mexico, and he needed someone to go with him. And he said, will you come? And I explained everything that happened to me. And he said, that's fine, come on.
Yeah.
And from there, it just the Lord's opened doors. I've preached in 3 countries outside the U.S., traveled all over the states, and every time that I stand up to speak, I feel like the Apostle Paul with his thorn in the flesh, because I realize, man, this could not happen of my own will and my own power. This is God who continues to find pleasure for whatever reason in keeping me in the ministry and using it. So that's how I was able to kind of work through it. But that didn't get rid of all the bitterness and fear and anger overnight. It was a process working it out. But that moment was pivotal for me.
And now, 2 children, teens,
Yeah.
and a beautiful wife.
Yes.
That is in the ministry with you, loves God.
Absolutely.
Actually out of our church.
Yes.
And what a cool story that is. So, finding God's purpose in life's problems. It's interesting to me that that's the title. Not necessarily finding God's healing, but why purpose? And I know maybe I'm being a little bit specific, but I think that most people, when they write, they're usually being specific on purpose. You know, why God's purpose in the midst of problems? Talk to us about that.
Sure. So, of course, one of the most famous passages in dealing with problems, Romans 8:28. We know all things work together for them that love God, to them who are the called according to His purpose.
To His purpose,
Yeah.
Interesting.
And that was my mindset for the background of the book. It took this type of tribulation to really demonstrate to me how little the ministry was about me. And
Okay,
maybe,
let's pause
Okay.
on that. Say that again, because that's interesting.
so when I was younger, you know, I would pray for God to send revival, for example.
Okay.
But my dream was that I'm going to be the vessel. You know, I'm going to be the preacher
Yes.
who blazes the trail for revival.
Yes.
I'm not going to be the guy pastoring 30 people on the backside of nowhere that nobody knows.
I want all the glory to be yours, Lord, but I'd like a little for me.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
And so as a young preacher, that was my thought pattern, that I want God to use me. It wasn't as much for the purpose. In all honesty, it was about, I want to be the one at the forefront. Yes, I want to do something for God, but I want to be the one leading this. And so it took being at a place and in a position where I realized that me preaching now isn't contingent on me anymore. Because honestly, and you know this as well as I do, there's some people that would rather people in my position just sit in the back of the church.
Yeah.
Maybe you can mow the yard.
Yeah.
You can give some money, but that's all we want out of you.
Yeah, because either you're not qualified, or A, you probably did something wrong that you should have done right.
Yeah.
You're probably somewhere at fault in this.
Yes.
And you're damaged goods.
Correct. And so it took that to put me in a position where I had to realize, man, this isn't about me. There's a lot of guys who went through my exact situation, love God. They were serving God, still serving God, but they're not preaching anymore. They are sitting on a pew and they are being faithful Christians. And, you know, that could have been me. And had it been me, God would be just and He'd be right. And so it brought me to that position where anything I get to do for God, it's not about me being at the forefront anymore. It's about us as believers trying to move forward, fulfilling His purpose in our lives.
You know, we were talking, it might have been this morning, maybe it was last night, but we were talking about how that you can pray the same thing, you're using the same words, but with time and experience and maturity, the meaning is different.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because you said, okay, I don't know any preacher that doesn't get up and say, Lord, fill me with your power. Help me to preach. I want to be a blessing to the people. I want to see souls saved. We need the unction of the Holy Spirit. We need the presence of Christ, all of those things. And I think at the time, we mean it to the degree that we can mean it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
we're not necessarily bad people, but there's still a lot of flesh, a lot of self, I should say.
Yeah.
But then you go through that situation and you get pressed. You can get up and pray the same thing. And man, I'm almost having to hold the tears back right now. You can get up and say, Lord, fill me with your power and with your spirit. You're saying the same thing you did 10 years ago. But I think there's just more of an awareness that it really isn't you. You really do know more of your weaknesses than you ever have before.
Yeah.
You really do know more of the need of the presence of Christ. And the product is almost less important to you as the producer is.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the book is an exposition, really, of what Paul went through with the thorn. And ultimately, the thorn was given to Paul, not because he said he was full of pride, but lest he be exalted above measure. It was to keep the pride from coming into his life.
Yeah.
And sometimes we don't always get to see that in peace like Paul was revealed, but God no doubt introduces these things into our life to fulfill his purpose, maybe to clean the pride out or to fulfill what he wants.
Or maybe it's a John 15, them that bear fruit, he purges it that it may bring forth more fruit.
Absolutely.
And now I've thought about that a lot, because I've wondered sometimes in ministry if a lot of my praying and preaching isn't almost deep down, I'm almost holding on to him. I'm gripping it and ripping it through prayer. And I'm not saying, again, you're doing the same thing. I'm praying probably now more than I ever have before. I study better now than I ever have before. Mm. But there's this, man, it's going to sound corny, but there's a rest. There's an abiding in him, because I think more in my life now, I'm more aware of what I am and what I am not, and what I will never be. And that any good thing that happens truly is a product of him.
Yeah.
And you can say that, but like Zora Neale Hurston said in her book, you got to go there to know there. You got to experience that. And that seems to be what you're getting at in the book here, is that in the midst of whatever trial, and listen, it might be a housewife that's watching this. Mm-hmm. It could be a young person. It could be somebody who's not in ministry. Maybe it's a business owner or a businessman, business lady, but they're going through problems and it's not always easy. But in the midst of that, there is a purpose that God is working in their life. That really seems to be what you're getting at there.
Yeah. And sometimes I feel like we don't allow that to resonate outside of ministry. It resonates with preachers and the spiritual aspects of things. But as believers, it should resonate with us wherever we are in life. Mm-hmm. And whatever our service to the Lord is. I mean, there may be a wife who's faithfully raising her children and teaching them the scriptures and teaching them about the Lord. It was John Wesley that said he learned more about the scriptures from his mother than all the theologians in Europe. Mm. And so I hope that a thought like this can resonate beyond preachers, mm-hmm. because there is purpose within the home and within the daily walk, the mundane pieces, so to speak.
Sometimes I think sometimes because we're such a non-agrarian culture, and because we're such a quick download it, get the app culture, that we don't realize that growth takes time. Mm-hmm. And most growth in the agricultural world and in the biological world is slow and mundane. It's just the daily grind of the sunrise, sunset, it's just that daily grind. But in that daily reality is great purpose being worked out.
Yeah.
I mean, I've even thought, not to talk too much shop, but I've even thought that, there is an extreme of going to the extreme where you're not aware of the need for the power of the Lord. But I think in some circles there is an extreme to where somehow or another there's a formulaic, I've made the crossing, I've prayed down fresh oil, I've got, I've got this moment of arrival, and now I'm there. I've got the touch of God, the blessing of God, the purpose of God. But the more I go, the more the more I think that it's not that way. The more I think that the power of God is simply doing the best you can, what you got, where you are, with the light you have.
Sure.
As God is using you. And I mean, what you were going through at 24, now all these years later, you could have, would have, should have. I mean, you might have, but you had to learn those lessons at that point. And coming through that is part of what shaped your purpose now and made you the preacher that you are now.
Absolutely. And looking back, I've made mention of it before, actually, in regards to this book, that I wish I would have known those lessons when I was going into it. And while, yes, that is absolutely true, I wish I would have known the things, because I made a lot of mistakes in the process that I wish I wouldn't have made. I had lacked a lot of faith that I wish I wouldn't have lacked.
Right.
But had I not gone through that, then I would have never got them. So it's a weird conundrum.
It is. It's a hard thing too, because I don't want to sound like, I do. I don't want to sound compromising, for lack of a better word. I feel like we shouldn't preach at a high level, teach at a high level. I think the Bible holds a high level. But man, I think there's got to be a lot of room for people to grow. And I think that, so this is an interesting thought I've had, and I was thinking about this with the book as well. I think that there's a fear among sometimes of us that we're not living up to what our own expectations are. And because of that, we tend to beat ourselves up. Mm-hmm. Like, man, I'm surprised I did that. When you really should not be surprised at yourself. You should be surprised that you're even doing what little good you're doing.
Right.
And I'm not sure that I'm conveying that well, but it's not a hypocrisy, but it's a false expectation that you're better or can do better than you are, that you're in process.
Right.
And it's okay to be in process. It's not okay to be in rebellion. It's not okay to be in rebellion at all, but it's okay to be in reconstruction, if that's fair to say. Yeah, that makes sense.
It does, and I think that it is a realization that we should have as individuals, not only about ourselves, but also allowing that to bleed over. I'll confess my faults right now.
Okay.
Because I just had a situation where there was a brother that some friends and we were discussing some of the ministry stuff and what was going on. And I particularly felt, and I told these guys, I had to go back to him and talk to him. I said, I feel like I was pretty hard on that guy. And what I was doing essentially is I was looking at all the negatives he had without ever weighing in on the positives, the things that he is doing for the Lord. It was very easy for me to spot, I would have done this different, I wouldn't have done this, or been this way. But one thing about going through stuff like this in life, it should at least teach us to exhibit the same grace with others that we want exhibited to ourselves. I had good friends with me during that time, and they walked with me and they helped me through things that, if it was me going through a valley with someone like that just a few years earlier, I probably would have wrote them off.
Yeah.
And so they were gracious with me, and I learned a lot about grace.
Yeah.
So it taught me that not only do I need to realize the grace of God in my own life, but need to be willing to demonstrate that to others.
Yeah, Paul said that he was refreshed, I think it was by Titus coming to him or something. Or grace is not just a concept, but it really can be personified in the way that we treat one another. So you're an itinerant evangelist. You're involved in an online Bible college, ministering to men that are already in the ministry. So regardless of what particular camp that the pastors are in, and obviously we both are in a niche group. Everybody has their group. But what do you see that are some of the struggles that particularly young pastors, or but anybody really in ministry, what are we facing today sometimes that maybe we're not honest about? That, man, we're just not getting good at this. We're failing here. Where do you see some of the struggles as you go around?
One of the great struggles I see, especially with a lot of my students, and I was just thinking about it before I came in here. Of course, on Facebook, everybody puts their mind on there, and I was looking at some things that this particular student, he's a graduate from our institute, had posted, and I had this realization, not just about him, but about a few others. They're young in ministry, and I think one of the things that these young guys really struggle with, not to sound carnal in saying this, but in finding who they are in the ministry, their role, and just a generalized acceptance of their sins or quirks or anything like that, but finding out who they are, their identity, if you will.
Let's flesh that out a little bit, because it's interesting you say that. I think that's something. I think I said that to you. We were talking the other night at the house, and at the church here, we hit a real, for lack of a better word, a real growth spurt in 2020. We've done some remodeling to make room here. We're contemplating figuring out how to build a new building. We feel like we're hitting our stride, but a lot of that is the Lord. All of it is the sovereignty of God. The first subject we talked about. But some of it has to do with finally coming to a place of being comfortable with myself. Mm-hmm. Why are we having such a hard time doing that? Is it a struggle to hold on to the old time truths in a 21st century setting? I see some guys get up and they're super, super young, and they're like, bless God, back in my day. I'm like, you mean like in 2001? You know what I'm saying? How about they're like a horse and buggy? They sound like some B.R. Lake, an old country preacher, back up in the woods in the holler. And I'm like, bro, you were born in Charlotte. You were born in 2001. So it's trying to find that identity. I don't know if it's that. Is it possible? And man, I know we're opening up a big can of worms here, but is it possible that guys aren't happy with themselves? They're not, because their ministry and themselves are so intertwined. In other words, they're identifying themselves by the number of people that they have on Sunday and the size of their ministry. And because of that, they feel inferior. Mm-hmm. Therefore, on Facebook, they have to inflate themselves. On YouTube, they have to inflate themselves. I know I just asked a big, broad question, but I'm just kind of trying to throw it out there and then let you make sense of it.
Sure. I think it's a possibility. Just thinking about some of these young men and having been able to preach for some of the guys that we've seen graduate, and not just them, but others, I'll go to their churches and, some of the things they do, they immediately start apologizing for how nobody's going to come to the meeting. And I'm not worried about that. The people who are going to be there are going to be there.
Right.
But they're worried about that. And then, I'll spend the week with them, and they spend the whole week. And I know in the ministry, it's good to have friends to vent to. But they spend the whole week just in misery, talking about how hard it is and what they're dealing with. And, how some of them just, it almost sounds like they hate what they're doing.
Exactly.
But I think they're measuring it to a standard of they see what somebody else is doing, mm-hmm. or they're in one of these niche groups or a camp, and they're looking around and they're trying to meet everyone else's standard. Yeah. You can't live life like that.
Or I think they're trying to live up to an expectation of leadership that is from a whole nother, not even generation, a whole other universe. Mm-hmm. You and I could throw names around that everybody would be familiar with, but I don't care what camp you're in. There was a whole other level of leadership couple generations ago. Mm-hmm. And if you tried to do that today, lead that way today, you would be worse off than what we are now. And I wonder if we're not holding ourselves to that standard in some way. Mm-hmm. I was sitting there thinking about what you just said, though. I think a lot of guys That's so true. So let me ask you this. With some of these guys was across the board, do you think some of it could be the fact, and we don't want to sit here and downgrade the churches. Mm-hmm. A lot of churches some of these guys are going into, we talk about the little big church. A lot of the churches these guys are going into, they're meat grinders. They're not allowing these guys to be themselves. As soon as you walk in the door, this is who you're going to be. This is who we want you to be. You're going to fulfill these expectations, and we're going to grind you down until that happens. Do you see that as a reality?
I don't see that as much with the guys I'm around. There's a few, yes, that absolutely does happen. And I know just because I don't experience it a lot with the guys I'm around doesn't mean I don't know that it happens. I know that that's a very real scenario, but a lot of the guys that I'm with that were facing that. I remember my first pastor, he's in heaven now, but he used to tell me all the time, he said, you just probably need to plan on starting your own church.
Yeah.
Because of situations like that.
Yeah. So we've talked about finding your purpose. We've talked about the challenge that we're facing. Let's get just a little bit in our niche field. Obviously, as Bible believers, there are certain stands that we take, and we don't really need to I'm not trying to get into the warp and woof of the stands. We can, but there are certain stands that we take, positions we hold. How do we operate today holding those standards and yet not, and that's a two-parter, holding those standards and yet giving people time when they come into our church to grow into that understanding? Sure. In other words, not making it because I feel like sometimes there's this, as people walk in, there's a subtle, whether we realize it or not, do you fit us? Mm-hmm. Do you fit here? We should never be. The church should be set up in such a way that when they come in, we can mold and shape and help them grow, but they shouldn't necessarily fit. Right. That's the point of growing in a way. How do we maintain what we think are important truths and yet give space to grow coming into the church? The second point to that question is, how do we fellowship with other believers that don't see it the way we see? Where do we begin to draw the line between, hey man, you're just flat out false, you're Joel Osteen, and then how do you go, listen, you're a brother in Christ, but you're wrong in this area, but I'm not going to fight you about it? And then, in other words, another broad question, but how do we make sense of that?
Right. Yeah, that is a tough one. You could probably exhibit a lot more wisdom on that than I could. I have consistently struggled with that because after my situation, when I went through that, I was raised, my background was a pretty strong independent Baptist. Uh-huh. And I mean, we had more standards than we knew what to do with. Mm-hmm. And so when I went through my situation, I hate to use the term like this, but to a degree, just the background part, not the Christianity or the salvation, but I did deconstruct all that. And I took it down to the brass tacks, and I said, what do I have to keep? For me, that was, number one, the gospel. That cannot be compromised. And for me, number two was the King James Bible. Uh-huh. That I have the gospel, and this was the vehicle by which God revealed himself to me, and revealed his gospel to me. Uh-huh. And so those two items, that was my bedrock. And I thought at first, these two things cannot be compromised on. And I figured that would just broaden the possibilities of fellowshipping with all of these new people. Uh-huh. And it didn't. No, it didn't. And from there, honestly, a lot of the things I grew up with, I'm not speaking out against the people who trained me. They were good people and loved the Lord and all that. But I just realized some of those things weren't necessarily biblical as much as it was living up to something from the past. Mm-hmm. So moving forward, I did just ground myself. Those are the two things I'm grounded in, and I tried to rebuild from there. Now, outside of that, there's a lot of room for grace.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah.
And I am speaking for myself. But I've sat down with people who may not see eye to eye with me on several issues, and we've been able to converse. And I think it does take an abundance of grace and being willing to allow people to have space to grow. Now, they may never grow into my understanding what I think they should be, but at the end of the day, the Bible says every one of us shall give an account for himself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. I agree with you. I think, for our particular field, the Bible is a huge issue. And, that is one of those ones where, I could preach for a lot of different people, and I do. But that's one where, if I'm invited to go preach and it was, the multiple version, it causes confusion. I mean, that's a thing. However, at the same time, I know some amazing people and amazing Christians that don't hold that same position that I hold. So I always feel like, to me, you should give me as much grace to hold my conviction as you have grace to hold yours.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And I don't necessarily think we have to cooperate. I don't think cooperation is necessary for being a gentleman.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean that, and listen, I think there's going to be a lot of people that go to heaven through churches that don't necessarily use a King James Bible.
For sure.
But that at the same time, see, to me, I think it's an issue of being mature and being able to hold two thoughts at the same time.
Right.
I don't think that the only people going to heaven are the people that use a King James Bible. At the same time, that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter. It means God's bigger than our foolishness. That's what I think it means. And heaven and hell are more important than our foolishness getting in the way. But it's not something you goes, no, that's not a big deal. So, let it go.
Yeah.
But I guess underlying one of the things I've noticed in some of our more independent is almost an anger at people. Does that make sense what I'm saying? It's almost you're angry at people. And I was thinking about 1 Corinthians 4. It says, what dost thou have that thou hast not received? You weren't born a King James Bible believer. You weren't born a Baptist. Somebody taught you that. You had to grow into that. You had to make, So I don't think there's anything wrong with holding the truth and preaching hard. But there is an anger that I think we have to stay away from that can actually be detrimental.
Sure. Well, scripturally, and this continually hits home with me, the servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle.
All men.
Unto all men. Yeah.
Yes. Not the ones you like.
Correct.
Right.
In meekness, instructing those who oppose themselves. So the picture there, I believe, is that there's a gentleness that is expected out of us, and that's a meekness, and that's not compromise. I don't have to scream in someone's face to be right, and I don't have to scream in someone's face to hold my beliefs. Just backtracking a little bit to what we were talking about a moment ago, like with the Bible issues, because that did remain a big deal to me. There were situations I was put in, even before my big problem. When I pastored, I had people come to my church that used other versions. And one person in particular asked me, because he knew how I felt about the King James Bible. He said, would you like me to leave? And I said, no, I want you to be here, but, just don't take it as an insult to you that I'm expressing my beliefs about this book.
Right.
But no, I do want you to be here as long as you want to be here.
I heard a preacher recently say that he's tried to be very conscious and get away from preaching cliches and preaching truth, because sometimes cliches can do more damage than good. You get up in, you get up in the pulpit, and I've said this, I'm going to get in trouble because somebody's going to send me a flip from my message. If the king ain't on it, the king ain't in it.
Right.
and you've got the New International Devil's Version or something like that.
Right.
We've all been guilty of those kind of things like that. But I wonder, especially in more of a metropolitan area where we are, on any given Sunday, there's 5, 10 plus visitors. I wonder across the board, saying things like that are unhelpful. Same thing too. God created Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. I've got multiple families in my church who have children or either grandchildren that are involved in homosexuality, that love God, that will not go to those weddings, that have taken tremendous stands. And they'll be the first one, if I stand up and point from the Word of God and say, "Thus saith the Lord," they'll be the first ones with tears in their eyes to go, "You're right, preacher, the Bible says that, we're taking a stand."
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if sometimes the cliches don't get us in trouble in our group, to where we throw things out insensitively, not aware of listening to it from the way that people are sitting in the pew. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a lot of truth to that. And I'm too. And
We're all guilty.
Yeah. I mean, I could think of 20 sermons somebody could probably go all about.
Right now. I'm not saying that right now. I know someone's right now on YouTube going up, putting a mash together.
That's right. That's right. We're going to be on Twitter.
Yes.
But yeah, I do agree. Another lesson from my first pastor, who's in heaven now, he used to tell me this. Now, not that he didn't do the cliche thing either, but he had a lot of wisdom in just sitting around and having these conversations. And he told me, he said, when you preach, you don't have to intentionally be offensive.
Yeah.
The gospel's offensive enough.
Right.
The word of God is offensive enough. Because growing up, we wanted to be the big bad campaign preacher that called people names.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, he drilled that into me. You don't have to try to be offensive. Just preach the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Preach it with compassion and love, and let the chips fall wherever they land.
Yeah. Let me circle back around and ask you this to kind of bring this, when you were going through this, you mentioned about finding purpose in going through it, but that healing is not something that you necessarily arrived at. It's something that's been growing over time. Whether it's a housewife, whether it's a business lady, businessman, whatever it is, whatever the trial is that somebody's going through, how did you continue, once you got to that moment, that turning moment in the parking lot you talked about, how did you continue serving the Lord? Or did you have to just say, I'm going to keep serving the Lord with the hurt and let the Lord heal that? Tell me a little bit about that experience. How did you continue to serve the Lord on one hand and yet be so wounded on the other?
That was definitely a piece of it that I had to work through. I mentioned it, not in these terms at all in the book, and I could see how somebody would read this and never come to the concept that I may have been thinking of when I put this down on paper. But working through this, there were days that, man, it was just painful. It was painful to get up, painful to live, painful to lay in bed at night. And as time went on, there were little changes that would happen. I think it was you that told me one time that time is the magic elixir.
Yeah.
And over time, I remember that I smiled again. I laughed again. Things that I never thought that I could do.
Right.
I studied my Bible again.
Mm-hmm.
I continued to pastor the church. Actually, when I resigned, after the whole situation, I found that out on Friday that she was gone. I went in Sunday morning. Preached my guts out. And I honestly thought it'd be the last time I was going to preach.
Yeah.
And I preached my guts out and told them I was done, that I was leaving.
Mm.
And afterwards, when I walked outside of the church, everybody in there followed me out, and they all hugged me and loved on me. And they asked me to stay, just continue on.
Yeah.
I told them I would do what I could as long as I could. And honestly, what had happened is there was just a severed emotional connection.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even that I was always just sad. It was that I had nothing. There was no feelings. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel bad. I just existed. And I would sit down to try to prepare. I was still 3 sermons a week. That's what a pastor does. And I would sit down and open my Bible, and there would be nothing there. I would just sit there and stare. And by that point, I had been preaching probably about 15 years or so.
Yeah.
And so I had plenty of reserves. For 4 months, everything I preached was stuff that I had preached before and studied before, and I lived off that. I would try to pray. It just felt like nothing.
Wow.
But there was a point that when I prayed, and I know it's not about the feeling. I know he hears us regardless of that. But there was a time that I prayed, and I really felt like it connected. And when I studied again, and it was like God showed me something again.
Right.
And all those things that I thought would never happen, they all started generating. And I don't know how else to say this, but it was like, you just got to keep living. You just got to keep enduring and trusting God. And one day, at least this is the way it was for me, one day I turned around, and literally I can say this for myself, that my family situation was better. My ministry situation was better. My financial situation, job situation, better than it's ever been. And God really, truly restored things. He restored things that were never broken.
Right.
So, but it was just part of suffering through it, just enduring, and eventually those things started to come back.
Well, that word endure is a big word. Big word. I think that's something, I think that's something that's so key, is you just keep putting work. My dad, I've told this story before, but I remember I was a little boy, we were watching football, and they were getting ready to play the game, and the interviewer was talking about one of the star running backs and said, well, he's going to be playing today, although, he says he doesn't feel, the reporter said he's probably not 100%, but he's going to be playing anyway. And my dad kind of, I said, what? And he said, that guy's never played football. And I said, why is that? That reporter's never played football. He said, because, son, after the first day of practice, nobody's 100% for the season. And I'll never forget, he said, you got to learn how to play the game hurt.
Yeah.
Boy, and I never have forgotten that. Of course, I didn't know what that meant.
Sure.
But as you go along spiritually, not that I've had your experience, but, my own experiences that we've been through, I mean, I've preached many times when I felt so, I've preached enough times I don't want to do it again.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, there's nothing there. Where are you? And you don't even want to be at church. You don't even want to be in the pulpit. It's an awful feeling, and in your heart that people love you. The Lord loves you. You know all this stuff on paper, but it's just empty, dry. There's nothing there. And that's a tough situation. The only answer, you can read 1 million books, but the only answer is to just simply do the next right thing.
Yeah. For me, it was where it came down to, and this was hindsight, not even something I necessarily realized during the whole deal. It came down to just a matter of faith. And the Christian life is so indebted to that concept, if I could say it like that, that it's not that we just have faith and we get saved and that's the extent of our faith, but it was a daily faith that God's going to take care of me through this. And you'll see this, or you've seen this when I got to the end of the book, that I had to have this realization. There's a lot of truths that you really have to confront during these problems in life. Cliches even, like God won't put more on you than you can bear and stuff like that. He'll stretch you to the limits of your humanity. And when he does, he says in 1 Peter that it's more precious than gold.
Yeah.
So he will stretch you to those limits, but it just took a consistent faith that, Lord, you're going to take care of me through this, and I'm trusting not necessarily even that it will get better, but that you have a purpose, a plan. You're going to accomplish your will through this. And that's the point of the last chapter. There are some people that they don't find healing here. And when I say here, I mean on earth.
Sure.
They go into situations health situations, cancer scares, things that you've seen, and you don't know what's going to happen, and there may not be healing here. And people enter into eternity just trusting God that His ways are right, that His purposes are right, and that by His pleasure, all things will be accomplished according to His will.
Yeah, that's so true. I was thinking about 2 Corinthians, we have the sentence of death in ourselves, that He hath delivered us. And then the other part says He will, but that He doth. Seems like we have faith as Christians, obviously, that He has delivered us by the cross. And we have faith, out there that He is coming back again, but it's that doth. It's the right now, Lord. And even as I'm talking to you, I can think of recent things, trials in my life that I've shared with you, that I picked up the phone and said, bro, you got to pray for me. This is going south. And you hang up the phone and you're looking up, and I can remember hanging up the phone with you. I was outside when I called you. And I literally am looking up at the sky going, God, I got to believe you're right now doing something. And that's like you said, there's got to be that faith.
Yeah.
That faith. And it's such a cheap word today, but it really is hanging your life and your soul on. And I almost, it's interesting. I know the Bible word is promise, but I think sometimes I get the connotation in my mind that of conditional promise. That I'll get the promise of God if I meet these expectations and qualifications. Well, there are some of those there, but I've been using in my own life facts, because the facts are irrelevant to the conditions, and that's the kind of promise that He gives us of His grace. It's irrelevant to my condition or my circumstances. The fact is, He will never leave me nor forsake me.
Sure,
that is a fact. Like you were preaching the other night about that jar that's out there, that's sealed, and so faith is not a cheap word. And it's, I think a lot of people use it, well, He's going to keep the faith. What they really mean is they're hoping, wishing something happens. But faith is a tearful commitment to believe God in spite of what you're seeing.
Sure. Yeah. Well, something you brought up, I would be remiss if I let the opportunity pass, because I mentioned it, but not to the extent I should have. You mentioned when you called me, one of the things that helped me more than anything go through all that I did is eventually folks did start reaching out, and friends that honestly new friends entered into the picture. My pastor that I sat under him for 8 years. One of the only preachers in the area pick up the phone and call me, but he called me almost every day. And then he said, hey, I was an hour from where he pastored, but he said, hey, come on down here. It's a long drive. I don't expect you to stay, but just come for 2 or 3 months. Let us minister to you, and then you can go wherever you want and do whatever you need. And it was people like that entered my life, the brethren that loved me and supported me.
Yeah.
There's a good brother, a preacher that went through a similar situation to mine. And the first couple weeks that I was alone, he called me up and he said, hey, I'm coming over your house tonight to spend the night. And so, make a place.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even a, hey, do you want this? It was, I'm coming, prepare me somewhere to sleep.
Right.
And we would just talk into the night and just share burdens. Well, specifically me, he just listened.
Yeah.
But it was those people that God introduced into my life that really, really helped me carry through it.
This book, Finding God's Purpose in Life's Problems, this is on Amazon, correct? Is it if there are pastors or people in ministry going through specifically some marital issues, marital struggles, or maybe have had that, is this something where that they could reach out to you and contact you and get, because it's hard sometimes in our immediate circles if we don't have that support system. Who do we turn to because we feel like somebody's going to judge us? That's the thing that's happened. I think a lot of times we did something wrong. Even when, and we were talking about this earlier, but even when my wife was diagnosed with cancer, That, to be honest with you, that was the first thing that went through my mind. What did I do wrong? I did something wrong.
Yeah.
But, getting this book, is it something where some of these guys, if you're out there and somebody's watching this, can say, hey, let me call Brother Keener and just, talk to him and see what's going on?
I would love to have them reach out. And honestly, for me, and I've noticed this for a lot of other guys, they're not needing to call and get deep advice or counsel. They just need to talk.
Yes.
And that's what I needed. I just needed somebody who was going to listen to me and pray with me.
Yeah.
And so, yes, absolutely. I would love to talk to anybody who needs that kind of help. As I've said before, I've never hid my situation, and I've always tried to be very upfront and open about it.
Yeah.
And transparent about having gone through that. I was told one time by a preacher, they said, well, you don't need to mention about going through a divorce and being remarried. That's whoever's having you in their job to figure that out. Or I've just never felt that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so because I have been open about it, I've been able to field many calls from guys who, man, it happened to them. Some were expected, some unexpected, and just be able to sit there and talk it out.
There's power in knowing that we're not alone.
Absolutely.
There's absolutely power. Well, the conversation could go on and on and on, but I think the title says it all: Finding God's Purpose in Life's Problems. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And, at the Little Big Church, that's what we want to do is provide honest conversations about honest issues that people are going through. And I think it's been very transparent, and I appreciate it. And I hope many, many people get the book, and many people reach out and do find purpose in life problems. Thanks for talking with us, Randy. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
What do you think, man?